Hi everybody! Today we're going to be talking about television. This is the television chapter. Are you ready? I know you are. Okay, we all watch a ton of TV. These viewing facts, I think, are actually probably the peak of what television is going to hit. At least in my household, most of the TV watching that we do, the television content watching that we do is on the iPad, and we use the TV to play Xbox. I know most of you, if you watch TV, you do it on your laptop through some sort of streaming. So typically, I think these numbers might drop, but they're worth talking about. Typical American watches more than 4 hours a day. More American homes have TVs than have indoor plumbing. Did you know that? That's a little scary, isn't it? Now, TVs are on almost 7 hours a day. But the follow-up question to that needs to be, are people actually watching it? I mean, how often is the TV on in the home, like where you grew up, when no one's actually watching? So I think that that's worth talking about too, because it's, a lot of times companies are measuring how many people are watching based on the fact that the television is simply on, and you can't do that. You can't do that. 70% of daycares use TVs. Now, there are pros and cons to this. We'll talk about this in class. Of course daycares use TVs. Why wouldn't they? It's like a sedative almost, right? And when I was about to have my first child, I was very naive and idealistic and said, my children are not going to watch TV. Yeah, and then I remembered that at some point, I'd want to take a shower or maybe do some laundry. Like it's very idealistic to make that happen, but I get it. If I ran a daycare, you bet there would be TVs on. You bet. It's like you've seen toddlers and babies with TVs. Their eyes are automatically drawn to the shiny box, right? We all watched a lot of TV when you were younger, of course. Your book says that television is the most influential medium since the printing press. We're going to talk about this in class because, yes, it's been extremely influential, but I think that we're getting a little savvier about it. I think that we're viewing more critically. We're demanding better programs. We have access to better TV now than we used to. So, yes, it's influential, but I think it's also a symbiotic relationship between Americans and TV. So let's talk a little bit about history. Paul Nipkow actually created the technology behind it. It was called a spinning disc, his flat disc, so that the disc spun and it had holes in it, and then he would shine a light from behind the disc and the holes would create a picture on the other side. So Philo Farnsworth is actually credited with inventing the television. He actually has the patent for it. He's from Idaho. And he was really, really young when he transmitted the first TV signal. It was the $, ironically enough. So he got the patent and the credit for inventing the TV. TV's growth was phenomenal as far as what it took to get from 1% of households to 90%. 12 years? Okay, that's amazing media penetration in a very short time period. What's interesting about this is that a lot of people thought that radio, books, and magazines would become irrelevant after the TV was introduced. And it kind of reminds me of discussions that people have about the internet now. Oh, well, television's not necessary, books aren't necessary, magazines aren't necessary because we have the internet now. And people were also very freaked out about comic books. Like, I think whenever a new medium comes along, we tend to panic, and then we get to know it better, and we realize that it's actually okay. And I think that's what happened with television when we realized that all of these media could coexist together. And they're still doing it, right? Even though you can access every form of media online, they all still exist, and they will probably continue to still exist. Anyway, by 1951, TVs were outselling radios, because remember, the golden age of radio was the 30s and the 40s because radio had no competition. Well, TV was the competition. Something that's interesting about early television programming is that it typically only had one sponsor, and that sponsor would typically insert their name into the program. So my favorite example is the Camel News Caravan. It was a news show, and it was sponsored by Camel, and the anchor actually smoked camels while he was reading the news. All right, so that one program had one sponsor. So Camel paid for that 30 minutes, right? Networks were worried that maybe those one sponsors for each program would have too much power over the programming. I mean, think about it. If a news story broke about cigarettes being unhealthy, would the Camel News Caravan have covered it? Of course not, right? So the networks wanted to diminish the role of sponsors, and so they started offering many commercial breaks during the program for lots of different sponsors to get in on it. It was cheaper that way. You know, if you were a smaller business, you could buy a 30-second spot for a television ad. You couldn't buy a 30-minute spot, right? So it made sense. Your book also brings up kind of an interesting little tidbit in cities where television signals were prominent, you know, because it didn't get out to the whole country at once. It started in the big cities because they had stations and they had signals. Well, in those cities, a lot of other businesses suffered those first couple years that television was popular. Libraries didn't have as much circulation. Theater tickets went down. Restaurant patronage went down. Taxi service didn't see as much business because people could actually be entertained at home for the first time. And we do most, you know, we get most of our entertainment at home. So it's hard for us to fathom what that would have been like in the 50s to be entertained in our homes for the first time. Now it's more unusual to actually go out and be entertained. Okay, so quiz shows were the most popular genre in the 1950s. I think it was because we like to play along. I mean, even now with Jeopardy, don't you kind of play along? It's fun to kind of insert yourself in the show. Well, you need to know about a man named Charles Van Doren. If you've seen the Robert Redford movie called Quiz Show starring Voldemort, it is about this scandal. He was a very telegenic lit professor from NYU, and he was on a program called Quiz Show. Or maybe it was the $64,000 question. I can't remember the name of the actual program. But ratings were up while he was on this program, right? So what did the producers do to make sure that he never left the program? Yeah, they fed him the answers, of course. And this was the first time that we were duped on television. It was a huge scandal. And kind of reminiscent of the War of the World scandal that we talked about last chapter with radio. It was the first time people realized, oh gosh, what we're being presented with through this medium might not actually be truth. And that's always good to remember. I'm going to tell you every week, you need to have an internal BS detector in your brain for everything. And people in the 50s didn't have that yet because they hadn't been with TV very long. The golden age of TV is considered the 50s and the 60s, again, because it had no competition for our attention. Sketch comedy was really popular, and so were variety shows. And we're going to show you some examples when we're actually in class. Sitcoms have been around for a long, long time. And yeah, I'm going to show you some crazy, cheesy sitcoms from the 70s. So get excited. What's interesting, though, is how sitcom production has actually demonstrated the change in our culture about certain issues, like women's issues, how family is defined, and even marriage. All of that has changed if you watch the sitcoms from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now watching sitcoms from today. You can see that shift in culture. So media scholars spend a lot of time wondering if the sitcoms precipitated the cultural change or just reflected it. We'll talk about that in class. All right, so there's some terms you need to know. Most dramas on television are episodic, meaning they take place in episodes, or the opposite of that, I guess, would be like a one-time television event or a miniseries, but most of them are episodic, okay? You can either have a chapter show that's episodic or a serial show that's episodic. A chapter show is one that you don't have to watch from the very beginning of the season to the end. There's no recurring story themes, okay? Most television shows now are serial dramas, and that means that you have to be familiar with the characters in order to understand what's going on. My parents started watching 24 like 6 hours into one season, and they didn't understand what was going on. Of course they didn't understand, okay? You have to start from the beginning. You can't start watching Walking Dead season 5. You gotta go back to the beginning. Same with Pretty Little Liars. Now, the only chapter show that I can really think of is maybe CSI. Like, it's a show that you can watch one episode and get it, okay? But the trend now is towards episodic serial programs for a couple of reasons. We have access to all those previous episodes now, right? We can Netflix them, we can Amazon them, we can get the DVDs and binge on those previous seasons to catch up, right? I mean, binging is the fun part of all of our television technology now. Most reruns that you see on TV are stripped. The term for that means that they are not shown in their original order, okay? Now, really good shows often merge a bunch of different genres. So here's like a list of typical television genres according to your book. But really good shows now are these all mushed together. If you think about Walking Dead, parts of it are hilarious, right? Parts of it are kind of intense. There's romance. There's a Western feel to it. The Office. Yes, it was a sitcom, but it was also kind of a soap opera, right? There were recurring dramas. It was kind of a reality show because that's how it was presented. It was almost like a mockumentary. Do you see how they all are kind of different? They blend together, and that's postmodern television. We're with such savvy consumers now, we're not just satisfied with one genre. We like to mix it up, okay? So that's a certain trend in sitcoms right now. The best trend in sitcoms, I think, because I think the laugh track is straight from hell, is the lack of laugh tracks. Gosh, I wish they would change that about Big Bang Theory. The laugh track there is so loud and so distracting and so unnecessary. It's almost like the producers are saying to the audience, we don't think you're smart enough to know what's funny, so we're going to tell you. I really like the newer trend of shows. Well, it started with Malcolm in the Middle, My Name is Earl, Everybody Hates Chris. God, what a great show. The Office, Arrested Development. Help me, what are some other sitcoms that don't? Oh, The Middle, Modern Family. They don't have laugh tracks. They're not needed. We're smart enough to know. Other sitcom trends include kind of the merging of genres, which we talked about just a minute ago, and also the outside filming and the editing. If you think about the show Friends, there were 3 or 4 sets, right? And they had 3 cameras, and they would alternate those 3 cameras, and it was the same sets all the time. Sitcoms now go outside and do other things besides sit in a studio in front of a studio audience with the canned laughter. So I really like the way that sitcoms are headed. I mean, sure, there's still a lot of stereotypes, which we'll talk about in class, but I think that they're more sophisticated now than they used to be. Which brings us to the #1 genre on TV today, reality shows. And let me tell you why. Well, yeah, let's get to this. Hang on. This is why reality shows are so popular. When you're building a television show, there's 2 types of costs involved. There's below the line cost, which is your crew, your hardware, your catering, your set, your cameras, okay? Above the line cost are all the actors, writers, and producers. So, for example, The Big Bang Theory is currently not in production. This is August. Not in production because they are upset with their salaries. And there's, what, 6 or 7 main actors in that program, and they all want more money. The last season of Friends, each one of those 6 was making $1.25 million per episode, and there's 22 episodes a season. So the above-the-line costs in a show like that were astronomical because these people wanted to be paid for their work, right? Okay, so now let's go back to reality shows. Do the girls on Teen Mom get $1.25 million an episode? No, thankfully. They're cheap. Reality shows are super, super cheap. Think about it. What are the production expenses for The Bachelorette? You've got, well, the roses, okay? You fly the guys and you rent out some big house in suburban Los Angeles. There's a couple of helicopter rides, lots of wine glasses with long stems, some trips. You don't have to pay anybody to be on that show. They're willing to do it for free. So your only expenses there are minimal. You don't have to pay for actors or writers, so they claim. Okay? The production costs are very, very low. Very low. So if you have a television production company, it makes sense for you to produce a ton of reality shows because they're so cheap. And plus they're so cheesy and in like a toxic sort of way, right? I mean, Hoarders, come on, who doesn't feel good about themselves after watching Hoarders? Or after watching Honey Boo Boo or Toddlers and Tiaras? I feel like Mother of the Year, right? So there is an emotional appeal to the reality shows, kind of like the quiz shows in the 50s. We insert ourselves in them and determine how we act. Like with House Hunters. If you've ever seen that show, don't you always kind of pick the house yourself? I know, right? Okay, let's keep moving. The network era declined in the 70s for two main reasons. The VCR, meaning we could watch whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted, and cable. So the networks showing television programs and having us sit in front of the TV when they decided it was time to show the programs. That was over. We had more control, which was awesome. Okay, so what you need to know about television financing is that the networks do not produce the shows. They buy the programs from production companies. So Warner Brothers Television, for example, produces all of these shows. Now, all of these shows are on different channels because Warner Brothers will sell the shows to whatever channel wants to buy them. So if you're looking for a future in television, you are most likely going to end up working for a production company because they're the ones that actually make the programs, okay? And we talked about the below the line, above the line. The way you remember which is that above the line starts with A and so does actors, okay? Also, many shows are produced with deficit financing, meaning that you lose money on the first few episodes, hoping that the show gains some traction and some followers and viewers, and then ends up making money in the long run through syndication. Syndication is how television shows make big money. Typically, once a program has 100 episodes, it's eligible for syndication, which means that other stations can buy old versions of the show and run them. That's off-network syndication. Think of it. How many stations can you watch The Simpsons on? Well, it started on Fox, but now you can watch reruns anywhere. Same with The Office. It started on NBC, but now you can see the reruns anywhere. Same with Modern Family, started on ABC, and now USA runs it constantly. Okay, that is off-network syndication, meaning that the show is now aired on a network where it did not originate. First-run syndication is kind of a different animal. First-run syndication is more like a radio syndicated program where Ellen, for example, does her show in LA by Warner Brothers Television, and then Warner Brothers sells that to whatever station wants it around the country. So Ellen might be on at 4 in the afternoon in LA. She might be on at 2 in the afternoon in Chicago on different channels. Okay, that's first-run syndication. Fringe programming is the terrific little 30-minute show you put on at 6:30, hoping that people will keep watching all the way through to your primetime schedule. We'll talk more about that. There's a term for sitcoms that will be around forever, and they're called evergreens. Andy Griffith will be around forever. Seinfeld and The Office will be around forever. Forever. Those are evergreens. So how do you program shows? You want a really good show at 6:30 to keep your viewers all the way through your primetime schedule. So you hear a lot about television ratings. A rating point is usually worth about 1 million households. A share is the percentage of TVs tuned in to that show that time. So a program with a 50 share means that half of the televisions turned on that moment were tuned into that program. We'll never see a 50 share again because we all have so many other things to do now than watch television. We're going to talk a little bit in class about how television has affected politics, especially what was so special about the September 1960 debate between Richard Nixon and John Kennedy. It was the very first televised presidential debate. What was interesting about that is that if you listened to the radio, you had a tendency to believe that Nixon had won the debate. If you watched television, you thought that Kennedy won the debate. So who won the debate? Well, it depends on what medium you chose. Okay? Now, take that beginning point and now think about where we get most of our news. Is it from radio or television? Television. So people need to be able to come across well on TV in order to be successful at politics. And that's too bad. I mean, I'm editorializing here, but there might be a lot of really fantastic public servants who don't want to run for office because they wouldn't come across well on television. We are a visual culture and we judge visually. Okay. You know what? There's a neat term that I want you to know about. It's called the sleeper curve. The whole idea behind the sleeper curve is that TV is actually making us smarter because we have to pay attention to shows now. They're complicated. There's a term that's similar to this. There's either lean back TV or lean forward TV. Lean forward TV means you have to pay attention. There's a lot of storylines happening at once. Lean back TV is like watching a baseball game. It's in the background. You don't necessarily have to pay attention every second. But proponents of the sleeper curve say that because television programs now are so involved and so intricate, that watching TV actually makes us smarter than it used to. There you go. Who thought that? The most watched TV primetime programs ever probably won't surprise you. But what is interesting is that since 2000, every single one of those has been the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is the one moment in our culture where we all come together and watch one program on the same channel live. It never happens otherwise, ever. You could say, well, yeah, Michael Jackson's funeral or the inauguration. Michael Jackson's funeral was on 19 channels. The inauguration was on like 12. The Super Bowl is on one channel, and we all watch it live, and we actually watch the commercials. So people who buy commercial time on the Super Bowl, it's worth every penny. Every penny. Okay, we are done with television. Are you exhausted? All right, we're going to watch some TV and talk TV in class. Make sure to come to me if you have any questions at all, and we'll see you in class. Bye.